Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, May 7th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, we are looking at a high of 85.7 degrees and a low of 56.7, so it will be a warm day if you are heading out and about. We are examining the growing scrutiny surrounding Howard Lutnick and his past association with Jeffrey Epstein. We will also investigate reports regarding political campaign staff allegedly leveraging internal polling data to gain financial advantages in prediction markets. In addition to these topics, we have a variety of other headlines to catch you up on as we navigate the news cycle today. We have plenty of important stories to get through this morning on Alex's News, so stay tuned. Good morning, and we're starting with a story that's roiling Washington this week. The House Oversight and Accountability Committee is sharply divided after a closed-door grilling of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. It centers on his ties to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. For the details, we turn to our reporter Ethan. Ethan, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. So this hearing happened yesterday, May 6th, 2026, and it ran from 11 a.m. to 3:15 p.m. Eastern. Lutnick is the highest-ranking member of the Trump cabinet named in the so-called Epstein files to face questioning, according to NPR. And what came out of it has Democrats and Republicans telling two completely different stories about the same testimony.
Ethan, before we get into the politics, remind us what these Epstein files actually are.
Sure. We're talking about roughly 3 million pages of documents, released this year under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. They include emails, flight logs, and business contracts tied to Epstein's network. PBS NewsHour reports the cache directly contradicts a number of Lutnick's earlier public statements. And it's that contradiction that put him in the committee's crosshairs in the first place.
And what exactly had Lutnick said publicly before all this?
Back in a 2025 podcast interview with the New York Post, Lutnick claimed he and his wife Allison had effectively, quote, cut ties, end quote, with Epstein in 2005. He described a, quote, disgusting, end quote, tour of Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, including a so-called massage room. He said it made him vow he would, quote, never be in a room again, end quote, with Epstein. But PBS NewsHour says the new files show the two men stayed in contact well into 2018.
That's a pretty big gap between the story and the paper trail. So what about the island visit everyone's talking about?
Right, this is a central piece. In December of 2012, Lutnick, his wife, their 4 children, and their nannies visited Epstein's private island, Little St. James, for lunch. Lutnick told the committee, per NPR, that the visit lasted only about an hour and happened during a pre-planned family boat vacation in the Caribbean. He testified the invitation, which came through Epstein's assistant, was, quote, unsettling, end quote, because he didn't understand how Epstein even knew where they were.
But the emails seem to tell a different story, don't they?
They do. CBS News reports that December 2012 emails show Lutnick personally coordinating with Epstein. He provided his schedule and even asked Epstein for the, quote, exact location for my captain, end quote. When pressed on the purpose of the visit, Lutnick reportedly said he, quote, remembered nothing, end quote. Democrats on the committee called that response simply implausible.
And I understand there's also a business angle here. Tell us about Adfin.
Yes, this is where it gets really interesting. Adfin was a now defunct digital advertising technology firm. According to investigative reports cited by CBS News and CNBC, Lutnick and Epstein signed co-investment agreements to acquire stakes in Adfin on December 28, 2012. That's just 4 days after that island lunch. Their signatures actually appeared on neighboring pages of the same contract.
Wait, so they signed the deal 4 days after? He says he barely remembers being there?
That's the timeline, yes. Lutnick signed on behalf of an LLC called CVA-FHI. Epstein signed through his U.S. Virgin Islands-based Southern Trust Company, Inc. Lutnick's representatives told the committee that Cantor Fitzgerald, which is Lutnick's firm, was only a minority investor, and that Lutnick was unaware of other shareholders. But the files indicate the business dealings involving both men and Adfin continued through at least 2014.
So how did Democrats on the committee react to all this?
Pretty bluntly. Representative James Walkinshaw, Democrat of Virginia, told reporters Lutnick spent hours trying to, quote, redefine the meaning of the word I, end quote. Lutnick apparently argued that when he said he'd never be in a room with Epstein, he meant only the two of them alone, with no one else present. Representative R.O. Khanna of California called the testimony, quote, embarrassing, end quote, and a, quote, farce of the English language, end quote. And Representative Yasamin Ansari of Arizona went even further, labeling Lutnick a, quote, pathological liar, end quote, who is enabling a, quote, cover-up, end quote.
And how did Republicans see the same hearing?
Very differently. Committee Chair James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, described Lutnick's account as, quote, forthcoming, end quote, and, quote, transparent, end quote. Now, interestingly, Comer told PBS NewsHour ahead of the hearing that Lutnick's earlier narrative, quote, wasn't 100% truthful, end quote. But he ultimately decided Lutnick had committed no wrongdoing. Comer's argument was essentially that 3 interactions spread over a decade don't add up to a close relationship.
Ethan, I understand the hearing wasn't even video recorded. Why is that a sticking point?
It became a real flashpoint. CNBC noted Democrats criticized the lack of video recording sharply, arguing it limits public accountability and makes it harder to scrutinize Lutnick's demeanor and answers. Combined with a closed-door format, critics say it gives the appearance of shielding a cabinet secretary. That feeds into a much broader concern that's been building around the file release itself.
What do you mean by that broader concern?
Some experts are calling the 2026 release a, quote, limited hangout, end quote. That's an old intelligence term for a partial disclosure designed to protect higher-ups. CNN and The Guardian have both reported on missing witness interviews, specifically FBI 302 reports that were initially left out of the February release. The Department of Justice, under former Attorney General Pam Bondi, said those files were, quote, incorrectly coded as duplicative, end quote.
And what was actually in those missing files?
According to the reporting, they involve a woman who alleged that in the mid-1980s, Epstein introduced her to Donald Trump at a location in South Carolina. She claimed Trump sexually assaulted her when she was 13 years old. Representative Robert Garcia, Democrat of California, has formally rejected the DOJ's explanation. He called it a, quote, convenient excuse, end quote, for what he sees as an administration cover-up.
Heavy allegations. Coming back to Lutnick, where does he stand legally and politically right now?
As of today, he hasn't faced any formal legal consequences. There's been no perjury referral, for instance. But calls for his resignation are coming from Democrats, and from some Republicans too, including Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky. The White House, meanwhile, is standing firm. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has affirmed the president's, quote, full support, end quote, for Lutnick.
And what's next for the committee itself?
A packed schedule, according to CNBC. Former Attorney General Pam Bondi is scheduled to testify on May 29th, just over 3 weeks from today. She's under subpoena to address what critics call the DOJ's politicized handling of the Epstein records. Then Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates is confirmed for a closed-door interview on June 10th, a little over a month away, to discuss his past meetings with Epstein.
That's a high-profile lineup, so this story isn't going away anytime soon.
Not at all. Between the rolling release of transcripts, the upcoming testimonies, and the unresolved questions about what's still missing from the files, this is going to stay at the center of the national political conversation. Lutnick survived yesterday's session politically, but the documentary record keeps growing, and every new batch seems to raise more questions than it answers.
Ethan, thank you for walking us through all of that. We'll be watching closely as Pam Bondi's testimony approaches at the end of the month. Coming up next, our second story of the morning. Welcome back. Our next story dives into a striking new investigation about political insiders making money off their own campaigns through online prediction markets. Joining me now to break it all down is our reporter Chloe. Chloe, good morning. What exactly did this investigation uncover?
Good morning, Grace. So, a bombshell investigative report by NPR and WLRN Public Radio, published today, May 7, 2026, found that political campaign staffers have been generating thousands of dollars in personal profit by betting on their own candidates. They're using material, non-public information, mostly unreleased internal and external polling data. NPR's reporter Luke Garrett led the work, and experts he spoke with described the space as a financial Wild West. The big idea here is that the so-called wisdom of the crowd has quietly become an insider's edge.
That's a fascinating phrase, an insider's edge. Walk me through how this scheme actually works on a day-to-day basis.
It's almost mechanical, Grace. Campaign operatives exploit the time lag between when a poll is finished and when it's released to the public. One anonymous staffer working on a statewide campaign in the South told NPR they got a tip about an unreleased poll showing their candidate significantly overperforming the current market odds. The staffer and several colleagues placed bets on platforms like Kalshi and Polymarket, while the candidate's, quote, stock, end quote, was still trading cheap. When the poll dropped publicly, contract prices spiked, and they sold for a quick profit.
And how widespread is this? Are we talking about a few rogue staffers or something bigger?
According to NPR, the practice was described as, quote, commonplace, end quote, across multiple campaigns. Another staffer on the East Coast told investigators they watched colleagues make a, quote, quick $5,000, end quote, during what they called, quote, topsy-turvy, end quote, market periods, because they had internal data the public didn't. One operative even said it felt, quote, almost foolish not to bet, end quote, when they held information that wasn't yet baked into the price. So this isn't isolated. It sounds like a culture.
Wow. Now I understand there's a major criminal case tied to this whole world. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, this is the case the Department of Justice is calling a, quote, watershed, end quote, moment. In April 2026, just last month, U.S. Army Master Sergeant Gannon Ken Van Dyke was charged with using classified military secrets to win over $400,000 on Polymarket. Van Dyke allegedly bet on the timing of Operation Absolute Resolve, which was the U.S. mission to capture Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. He placed those bets just hours before the raid actually occurred. So we're not just talking about polling tips anymore, we're talking about classified intelligence.
That's stunning. And on the political side, are there candidates who've been caught betting on themselves?
A few notable ones, yes. Mark Moran, a Virginia Senate candidate and former reality TV contestant, was fined $6,229 and banned from Kalshi for 5 years for betting on his own race. Interestingly, Moran claimed he, quote, wanted to get caught, end quote, to expose the system's flaws. Kalshi's internal monitoring also flagged and fined Matt Klein, a Minnesota state senator, and Ezequiel Enriquez, a Texas House candidate, for betting on their own campaigns. Their fines were smaller, between $500 and $800, but it signals a new era of platform-level policing.
So the platforms themselves are starting to crack down. But is any of this actually illegal under current law?
That's the murky part, Grace. The NPR and WLRN report highlights a real debate over whether this constitutes illegal insider trading. Jeff LaRiche, a former trial lawyer for the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, told NPR that using non-public information could violate the Commodity Exchange Act, but only if the staffer has a duty not to use that data. He said employment agreements and prediction market user agreements would be the, quote, key documents, end quote, in any investigation. So legally, it really hinges on contract language.
And what about the CFTC itself? Are they geared up to handle this?
Honestly, not really. Former CFTC Commissioner Kristen Johnson told NPR the commission is currently, quote, not fit, end quote, and lacks the staffing levels to enforce election-related insider trading cases. Now, the CFTC did issue an advisory in February 2026, asserting authority over the, quote, misappropriation of material non-public information, end quote. But the legal definition of whether a campaign staffer owes a, quote, duty of confidentiality, end quote, is still unsettled, so enforcement is essentially playing catch-up.
You mentioned Kalshi and Polymarket earlier. Are those two platforms equally easy to police?
Not at all, and this is a really important distinction. Kalshi is a U.S.-regulated exchange and uses strict know-your-customer identification to catch and fine users. Polymarket, on the other hand, operates largely offshore and through decentralized finance, allowing far greater anonymity through VPNs and crypto wallets. So while Kalshi has been catching what you might call low-dollar violators, the bigger thousands of dollars profits staffers brag about are likely moving through unregulated offshore markets. That's a huge enforcement gap.
Given all that, what's Congress doing about it right now?
There's actually a multi-pronged federal response unfolding as of today. The headline piece is the Public Integrity in Financial Prediction Markets Act of 2026, introduced by Senators Todd Young, Republican of Indiana, and Alyssa Slotkin, Democrat of Michigan, as Senate Bill 4188. Representative Richie Torres, Democrat of New York, introduced the House companion, H.R. 7004. The bill would treat prediction market contracts like traditional securities and ban, quote, covered individuals, end quote, including the president, Congress, and all campaign staffers, from trading on material non-public information. And critically, it explicitly lists internal polling data as MNPI.
That's a significant step. Has the Senate itself taken any internal action?
Yes, just about a week ago. On April 30th, 2026, the U.S. Senate unanimously passed the Moreno Resolution, which immediately amended Senate rules to prohibit senators and their staff from participating in prediction markets. And going back a little further, on March 24th, 2026, the White House Management Office issued a memo warning staff that using non-public government information for wagers is a, quote, criminal offense, end quote. So all three branches are starting to move in the same direction.
Let me ask you something a little more philosophical. Are these staffers actually trading on real information, or are they manipulating the market?
That's a critical nuance the investigation raises, Grace. Internal polls are often what analysts call, quote, PR artifacts, end quote, released specifically to create a narrative of momentum. So staffers may really be front-running a temporary sentiment spike rather than genuine information. Market analysts told NPR that nonpartisan, quote, gold standard, end quote, polls cause lasting shifts, but internal polls usually produce, quote, spikes and fades, end quote. Staffers profit on the, quote, sugar high, end quote, the market gets when a skewed poll leaks, then sell before it corrects.
So whether the data is accurate or misleading almost doesn't matter. The damage is the same.
Exactly. The NPR and WLRN report concludes that, regardless, the practice undermines the integrity of these markets as a, quote, truth discovery, end quote, mechanism. That's the whole pitch of prediction markets, right? That they aggregate information better than polls or pundits. But if insiders are skimming off the top before the public can react, the price signal becomes corrupted. And with billions of dollars now flowing into these markets, that's a serious concern.
Last question. Do regulators see an end to this Wild West era?
They're certainly trying. The CFTC's Director of Enforcement, David Miller, recently said the agency is actively monitoring platforms for, quote, suspicious timing, end quote, and, quote, blockchain clusters, end quote, that suggest informed trading. Combined with the Moreno Resolution, the White House memo, and the Young-Slotkin-Torres legislation, there's real pressure building. The anonymous staffers who spoke to NPR may soon find that the Wild West era of campaign betting is closing fast. But for now, Grace, a lot of money is still moving through the cracks.
Fascinating reporting, and a story we'll clearly be following for months. Chloe, thank you so much for breaking it down for us this morning.
Always a pleasure, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Starting abroad, Western intelligence agencies are reporting that Russia has decided to stop winging it with their hybrid warfare. Moscow has professionalized its sabotage efforts, moving away from cheap, disposable recruits, and instead coupling with organized crime and special forces to create sophisticated cells. According to Poland's internal security agency, the spy line has been busy, with as many espionage investigations in the last 2 years as the previous 30 combined. It seems they've even started a school for scandal at Bauman Moscow State Technical University, where a secret special training faculty acts as a direct pipeline for the GRU to recruit elite hackers. National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard is monitoring this long-term commitment to destabilizing the West, which targets everyone from activists to industry leaders. Meanwhile, President Putin is taking down time literally, reportedly retreating to underground bunkers to avoid becoming a sitting duck for internal coups or drone strikes. On the high seas, health authorities are trying to contain a situation that has gone viral in the worst way. An outbreak of the Andes hantavirus on the cruise ship MV Hondius has resulted in 8 cases and 3 deaths. This strain is particularly catchy, as it is the only one known to pass from person to person. After departing Argentina for the Antarctic, the ship has left a trail of sick-faring passengers across 23 nationalities. 40 passengers disembarked at St. Helena, and 1 traveler even exported the virus to Switzerland. While the CDC says the risk to the American public is low tide, they are keeping a weather eye on the mortality rate while the ship remains stationary near Cape Verde or the Canary Islands. Back at home, Virginia's political landscape is looking a little hazy after the FBI executed search warrants at the Portsmouth office of State Senate President pro tempore, L. Louise Lucas, and her cannabis dispensary. This joint investigation into bribery and illegal sales, which traces back to the Biden administration, has sparked a blunt response from Lucas, who calls the raid a half-baked attempt at political intimidation. The timing is weirdly suspicious to House Speaker Don Scott, who called the raid theatrics following Lucas's redistricting effort that could roll 4 House seats toward the Democrats. While the Justice Department hasn't lit up any formal charges yet, the Virginia Supreme Court is inhaling the details as they consider challenges to the new maps. In the Middle East, President Trump is hoping to seal the deal on a 14-point plan to end the war with Iran that began on February 28. The proposal includes a 15-year cool-down on Iranian uranium enrichment and unfreezing $100 billion in assets. In return, the Strait of Hormuz would be wide open for business. While Pakistani mediators are busy, Trump warned that if Iran doesn't sign on the dotted line within 1 week, military operations will resume at a sky-high intensity. The pressure is already being felt on the water, where a Navy Super Hornet launched from the USS Abraham Lincoln recently gave an Iranian tanker a rudder awakening. The jet used its 20mm cannon to disable the M/T Hasna after it ignored warnings to steer clear of a naval blockade. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the blockade is choking 90% of Iranian trade, proving that the administration is stern about enforcing its terms while negotiations continue. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.